Welcome everybody to Technology and Research. I'm Michelle Parrish and I'm from Akron Children's Hospital, moderating today with Robert Fowler, who's from Boston. Today we're going to talk about research and best practices. And in the past 20 years, the growth of the internet and associated technology has significantly changed the way we communicate, seek information, and engage with others. First, we're going to have Sarah Dietrich from the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. She will be discussing how her center started utilizing electronic regulatory. She uses Viva Vault, and what to expect if your center is looking to utilize a similar system. These are some challenges that we face with technology. What we really need is we need better systems to share and communicate between sponsors, CEOs, and we need to all come together to find better technology. And Sarah, I'd like to welcome you.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I was like, is that the right one? I think so. And how do I advance? I can just.
Right there.
My clicker?
Right, that silver thing.
Oh,
There you go.
okay. This is pretty cool. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit about best practices for integrating and utilizing an e-regulatory system. Like Michelle said, our university uses Viva Vault, so that's what I'll be speaking to today. I have nothing to disclose. And here's just a little bit of an agenda for the things that I'll be covering. I'll go over a brief introduction of e-regulatory systems. After that, I'll show a bit of a timeline for our center and how we integrated the system. After that, I'll show some screenshots and metadata so you can get an idea of what it looks like to upload documents into the system and the information that you need to input. I'll talk about pros and cons of using an e-regulatory system, followed by some best practices and lessons learned. And we'll end with a summary, and I'll answer any questions you may have. So what can an e-regulatory system do? So this can vary by system to system, but for us, utilizing Viva Vault, it serves as an electronic ISF. So everything that was normally in a paper binder can now be electronic. So there's no need to store things in paper. The system allows for electronic signatures. You can send documents electronically, such as 1572s, FDFs, training logs, etc. And this system is actually 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. This is actually one of the things that we didn't know that it did at first, but has probably been the biggest blessing for us in terms of time savings. It's been wonderful. They can help maintain consistency across ISFs. So everything is stored in the same manner across studies. So you don't get the issue that occurs with paper ISFs or a binder where documents get filed in different sections and it can make it hard to find them. Training documents that you can, did I skip one? Training documentation. So again, sending things over for signature electronically can ease the burden of chasing around staff members, all of the physicians you work with on a study. Again, not something we were thinking of, but it has been a welcome blessing. Maintaining delegation of authority logs. This isn't actually something that we currently utilize. It's something that our department has looked at, but we're really waiting on our cancer center to test this out before we do it. But we have the capability of maintaining our DOAs in the system. They can track expired documents. We can pull reports to see who has documents expiring soon. We used to do this manually in a binder, which took a lot of time, but now we can pull a report and I can email a physician and say, hey, You have your GCP training due in 3 months. Just remember, put that on your calendar. And it can also simplify monitoring. Monitors can now view things off-site or on-site. And since all documents get filed in an easy manner, it makes it easy for them to find documents. We've also found that a lot of our monitors are very comfortable using Vault, so it's been easy to get them in the system. So why even integrate to an e-reg system? COVID. COVID hit and we got sent home, and I think we all can agree we were lost. We didn't know what to do. And we realized we would no longer be able to do things the way they were. We had to work on making sure our patients could get their IP, figuring out how to get safety labs done. And then once we did that, we're like, well, how do we get monitors to be able to do their job? And while this is something I wanted to do for a long period of time, COVID sort of forced us into it. And this is also at the same time we started getting Epic access for our monitors. So we were sort of more able to put everything into an electronic fashion for our group. So again, for us, it was really just a mechanism for remote monitoring during COVID. So here's a bit of a timeline for us. So I started this process March 16th, 2020. I started fact-finding on available system options. I started emailing other department contacts. I reached out to our Office of Clinical Research to see what we had available. And at that time, I found out that we actually had access to VivaVault. And so not a lot of departments were using it. It was something that we had available to us. At the end of June in 2020, we decided to implement a single study in Vault. At that time, the only study we had in startup was the Simplify study. And so that was the first study we started uploading documents and getting acquainted with the system. By mid to late July, we made the decision to start moving all of our new studies into Vault. Again, all of our older studies and things that were already ongoing, we left in paper form, but all of our new studies would then be in Vault. At the end of February, February 2021, we started piloting the e-signature process in Vault with our lead PI. We have one PI who was doing the bulk of our studies at the time, so we wanted to see what it would be like for him with this process. October 2022, we started the process of getting all of our PIs and sub-Is access to e-signature in Vault. And by April 2023, we had everyone implemented for the e-signature process. This distance here is quite large. During this time, again, we had one PI who was doing the bulk of the studies. Our group works on a lot of different studies. So in addition to cystic fibrosis, we do ILD, we do NTM, non-CF bronchiectasis, some transplant studies. At this time, the bulk of them were done by one PI. By October, we realized we had a lot of other studies starting up in other disease processes, so it just made sense to start getting everyone access. And then this distance here, you'll see from October to April is quite lengthy. As you know, trying to get things done with physicians and chase them around for signatures and get things filled out can take a long period of time. So it took us a while to get everything done so that our physicians could operate in Vault for the e-signature process. So now I'm going to show some screenshots and metadata of what it looks like to work in Vault. Before that, I'm going to talk about a couple different types of documents that exist in Vault. So the first is what we call person documents, and these are things such as CVs, licenses, your GCP certificates, your IATA certificates, documents that relate specifically to one person. After that, we have organization documents. So these are things that exist for the university as a whole, such as our CLIA CAP certificates, our lab normal ranges, any of our IRB policy documents. And the last type is our study documents. So these are things such as our study training logs, any source documents that you put in there, protocols and IBs, ICFs, IRB approvals, all of those types of things. And so I'm going to show you some screenshots of what it looks like in Vault. I'm going to be using 4DMT. That's a study that we've been working on and that is fully integrated into Vault. On the left here, you can see all of the fields that we can put in, and then I'm going to show you sort of one by one what they look like. So the first we have our study team assignments. I can add in our principal investigator, I can add in our sub-investigators. Move. There we go. Our clinical research coordinators and our pharmacists. So here on this assignment status, you can see that most of them are actually listed as active. Having them placed in this active status means that all of their person documents will link to the study. So by having them active, it means all of their CVs, all of their GCP certificates, IATA certificates, medical licenses, et cetera, will then link to the study. Those who are in the proposed status will not have documents attached. So I have our pharmacist here in the proposed status. And it was actually when I was creating the slides that I realized that she was not actually in the active status. So I immediately went and changed her. Here we have our monitor and auditor assignments. So here's the list of the monitors that we've had on the study. We have 2 that are inactive, and we actually have 1 active monitor. And here we have their scheduled start date and end date. So for this monitor, they were able to see documents from September 18th until October 18th. And of note, once a monitor has an account created and they complete their training, the RC is able to control the start and end dates. We're only allowed to give them access for 30 days at a time, but as soon as that time expires, if they need access again, the RC has the ability to go in. This was actually something that was modified with an update recently, which has been super helpful to do. And here I have the product. The product name is 4D710. And in this area, I can put our partner organizations. So for this, we were using the Penn Lab or the HUP Lab, and also the Penn IRB. And again, having them in the active status means that all of the documents in Vault associated with these specific organizations will link. For instance, for the lab, this would be the CLIA and CAP certificates, again, the lab normal ranges, the director's CV, et cetera. So by having them active, the monitor can now see all of those documents. And here is the participants or subjects. You have the ability to add subjects in and upload source. You cannot put PHI in there. This isn't something that we utilize a lot, but we do have the capability to do so. So I'm going to show, I think, hopefully this works, a video of what it looks like to upload a document. Okay, so you just go to the upload button, and I'm going to upload an amendment, a protocol amendment. In our document type, I'm going to put protocol. So this is a protocol. And we'll hit the next button. And here you can see the metadata that we have to enter. So I'm going to enter that this is Amendment 6, that the study is for DMT, and the date of this was September 15th, 2023. And now one of the issues we have right here is with the versioning of it. So for instance, it's listed as version 0.1. Once this becomes finalized, it will be version 1.0. However, as you know, this is Amendment 6. So this is one of those things that sometimes can be a problem because monitors may not know exactly where to look. So this is something we found that can be problematic. Most of the times when we start a study, we're not working with protocol 1 from the get-go. So those different versions will not align for the most part. So that's what it looks like to upload a document. Oh, that is not what I want to do. Try this. And so here you see the reports that we can do. So one of my favorite reports, the one that I use most often, is documents that are expiring in the next 3 months. So I can pull this report and see what documents that I will have expiring in October, November, or December. And when I pull the report, I can see everything that's going to be expiring, and I can sift through it and email people. There was a recent upgrade, and with that upgrade, I have to sift through all Penn documents. I no longer have access just to our departments. I have to go through everyone at Penn. It's a little bulky. It takes a little bit more time, but it's really not too complicated. So let's start into some of the pros and cons that we've found since utilizing the system. So it's a central repository, so it's great. All regulatory documents are located in one area. This actually has helped to save space because we no longer need bulky ISFs hanging out on our shelves. It allows for e-signatures. Again, this has been one of the best things that we were not expecting. Being able to get signatures saves our RCs and myself during the startup process so much time. It's really the reason I can even work remotely. We work in a large institution and work in different buildings. We have physicians who are on service. We have physicians working from home. Not everyone is in clinic, and finding them to get signatures could take a very long time. This has helped tremendously. It allows for easy browsing. Again, all documents get filed in the same manner across studies, so it's very easy to find. Had a reduction in administrative burden. Again, not having to chase around physicians have been super helpful. It's freed up their time to do more important tasks. It's relatively intuitive. I have one of the cons is that you need practice, but that's with any system. But I have found that Viva Vault is relatively intuitive. Expiration reports. You can easily pull reports to see what documents are expiring. Again, this has really helped in planning with our physicians when they have things that are expiring. We can give them ample time to get it completed, and I think that they really appreciate that. Increased monitoring compliance. So it makes it easier to be monitored and increases compliance. We can easily drag and drop a document into the system and file it later if we don't have time to enter the information at that time. So much easier for me than working through a stack of documents, which is the way I used to do it. Just have a stack of documents on the side, and when you would get a chance, you would file them in your binder. It's also easier for the monitor to find. Most of our monitors have experience in Vault, so they actually enjoy using it. Sorry about that. Some of the cons of the system. There's a lot of legwork to start. You have to get system access. You need to chase people around, get forms filled out so that an account can be created. You need to do training, which can take time. Another con, for our center, RCs have to complete 3 hours of training, and that is really just the beginning because, again, practice makes perfect. So the more you use it, the easier it gets. Some things can take longer to file. For instance, an IRB submission and approval to look the way it would in a binder has to be filed in a different way. So the documents need to be linked in specific ways. It's kind of a clunky piece of the system, and so I found that takes longer. But that's really the one thing that I found that can take longer. Technology can break down. We recently had a monitor on site and the system was down. We didn't know that it was going to be down. Fortunately, it ended up coming back online, so it wasn't that big of an issue, but as with any technology, things can happen. We also had, I think it was last December, there was a really big upgrade happening, and so the system was going to be down for about a week and a half. So we really had to put forethought into what do we need done now? Does the monitor need access? What do we need to upload? Making sure that we save documents on the side so that they can get uploaded when the system came back up online. And it has to be maintained. There's always system upgrades. There's always continued training. Things change. It looks different. You just have to be prepared for that. And here's some of our best practices and lessons learned. I actually reached out to our Office of Clinical Research, who works more on like the IT side, and the oncology department, because our cancer center has worked in Vault for many years. They only operate in Vault. That's all they know. So I wanted to get some of their feedback on this piece as well. So one thing I heard from our Office of Clinical Research was to have 2 users per system, 2 users per team. This is really at the beginning to make sure documents are being uploaded the same across user. And also in the event of turnover, you want to make sure that you have another person trained to be able to use the system. Consistency. You want to make sure documents are filed and named in the same manner. I'll be very honest, this is an issue at our site. When we integrated this, the idea was that we would have a naming rubric for our documents. I just never followed that. So something that we need to work on and is a work in progress. The consistency in metadata is what allows for easier browsing. So that's why you really want that. I do have information from our cancer center, so it should be easy to integrate. You want to develop and follow SOPs. The good thing with Vault is that they have some really good SOPs that you can personalize to your center. So for instance, we have an SOP on utilizing Vault as our EISF, and so it's very detailed in the fact that we use it and how we use it. And we also have one for electronic signatures. Again, these were all located in Vault, and I could personalize to the university. We want sponsors to know that this is the system we use and that we don't deviate from it, and having these SOPs helps. You want to push back on sponsors. Obviously, in this is not just relevant to Viva Vault. This goes in so many ways in clinical research. But you want to make sure that sponsors know that this is the system you use. You don't want to download documents from your system and upload into theirs, because that really just creates double work. If there are issues, make sure you have an SOP ready that you can show them. And to be honest, I think this is going to continue to be an issue until, or if there is a single platform, but until then, push back. I met with someone last night who has provided support in pushing back on a partner that was wanting us to use their own system. And so use your resources, make sure you reach out to people, let them know this is the system you're going to use. It takes a village. Penn has a village, so we have our Office of Clinical Research, and we have fully dedicated IT staff to Vault, which makes it easy. So I always have someone to go if I have a question. If a monitor has a concern or doesn't have access, I can always troubleshoot with one of them. And so while you don't need a village, it can help. So I was just talking to someone earlier, and I said, it's great working at a large institution because we have these teams to go to. But with that, sometimes comes complexity. So we have required trainings we need to do, forms need filled out. And so while having this village is nice, if you're a smaller team, you can easily do this as well. And you may not have some of the hurdles or red tape that we have at a larger institution. There's a huge effort required. There's a lot of work up front. So you want to make sure that you think through this and have time to dedicate to getting it online. You certainly don't want to try and rush through the process or have a lot going on at any particular time. You want to make sure that you have time dedicated to it. Sorry. You want to use it correctly or not at all. So you can't use PHI in here. You want to stack documents on top of each other. So when you have a protocol amendment, you can stack it on top of the other one. So it's very easy to see the changes and the amendments that have happened. You don't want to download documents and send them over email. You want to make sure you get monitors access to the system. And we do this from the get-go. Starting at the SQV, if they want documents, we immediately say, this is our system. You want the documents. Here's how you get access. That's what you're going to do. And again, it's actually gone really well. I haven't had a lot of pushback. I will say if someone comes on site and they want just the PI's CV or license or GCP, sometimes I'll go ahead and email that. It'll be easier. But when we're talking multiple documents, multiple people, always access to the system. Again, it's not always easier. Some things can take longer, but in our experience, those small things are greatly outweighed by the time savings in other areas. And the last one is you want to be all in or all out. So you either want to go electronic or stay in paper, but you really don't want to try to straddle both worlds. It takes time to start working in the system, which is understandable. But what you want to do is work to get a stop date for using your binders so that everything moving forward can be in an e-regulatory system. So in summary, it's a multi-use system. There's lots of things you can do with an e-regulatory system, lots of pros and cons. You want to make sure you put the thought into it prior to instituting and make sure you have your team on board. It allows for remote monitoring, which has been super helpful for us. You want to keep some of these best practices in mind. Technology can be finicky, and we know that. But for us, we've had a huge time savings for RCs, which allows them to do some of the more important work and the work that we strive to get done for our patients, which is really what we want. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
I don't know if it's working. It doesn't.
It
sound
is,
like- It is?
yeah.
Oh, it doesn't sound like it from here,
Well,
but-
maybe a little.
I'll talk really loud. It's okay. It's not actually a question, but I don't know if any of our CRAs are in the room or not. But we also at the TD and Coordinating Center we're using Montream, so we have an electronic e-reg system, and we had to go through that process of creating a naming rubric, and I don't think we did it on our own. I think there is like a standard rubric, but I'm pretty sure we could share that if anybody is in the position of needing to create a standard naming convention.
That would be helpful. I would actually love to get that. Because I think the thing with the oncology centers, there's a lot of documents that they have and that they get that aren't pertinent to us. And I haven't worked in oncology research, so I suspect it's just different. But also a lot of things that we have that I didn't see there. So that would probably really help. I'd love to get that.
Good morning. Our site uses Viva as well, and one of the problems we're having is with the DOA log. So some sponsors will send us the paper log when you can use the electronic log on the Viva site. I know you all haven't implemented it yet, but has there been any conversation, or have you all have conversation around what you all will do? Will you all use both, or will you just say, no, we have it here, and what that would look like?
That's a good question. So I was really ready to start the DOA thing and had talked to others who had instituted that. And then throughout conversations with the Cancer Center, I guess the Cancer Center started piloting it, and there were some things that they really wanted tweaked. And Penn has a really good relationship with Viva. Like, we have specific people that we work directly with for things like this. So the Cancer Center was asking for some things to be changed specifically that I think were more related to the Cancer Center as opposed to us, related to the number of people that they put on their delegation of authority logs. So I think it'll be one of those things where if we go to electronic DOAs, we're going to go to electronic DOAs. There may be people who provide pushback, but again, I think it's the same with the system. I think we just need to say, well, this is our system. This is what we're going to do. Here's our SOP that we follow. And hopefully over time, we're able to just find ways to work around it. I don't really have a good answer because we haven't really dabbled in it too much. And so I don't really know what the concerns are from the sponsor side, but it would really be a collaboration, I think, working with them to try and figure out, is this something we can do with you guys or not? But hopefully our goal is to get to the point where it's all electronic.
Yeah, so on my side, we have experience because we use e-compliant. And I just wanted to make a comment with regard to some issues that we've had with it. In terms of getting the PIs to sign off, it's an issue. You send them emails, all they need to do is log into their account and sign off, and they ignore it. And you resend until we have to physically go to their office and show them where to find the app. This is what you do. So in some situations, if you look in our thing, a lot of missing signatures, missing training, IRB updates, amendments, they're just not doing it. And we have to physically go on, it's time consuming for us to physically go and sit with them to show them how to do this, right? So that has been a bugbear that we have had in terms of, using it, its utility. Another issue is that the monitors still want to come on site. We don't know what they want to come on site for.
They want to travel.
They want to travel.
They want to take a trip. I mean, they're like, hey, can I come to Philly? Sure, come to Philly.
Right.
I mean, you could look at this from wherever you live, but if you want to come to Philly for a day, sure, go ahead.
But we're in Florida, so everybody wants to come to Florida. Right? Because we have, and I think with EMR, we're compliant. And as you said, so you find that they're coming there and they're logging into the electronically on site, doing what they could have done remotely. And then the other thing too is access prior to the visit. Our system requires we're an large hospital system. So to get access, it's a long process. And so we usually ask them to apply at least 2 weeks before their visit. And sometimes that email where they're sending to us, because they have to go through the scheduler and so on to IT, sometimes it gets lost and nobody follows up. So you're finding on some occasions that it's a visit date and they don't have access. So we're still source, de-identifying, scanning, and emailing. So there are some glitches. I'm just sharing that.
Yeah, I think, so for the first point, so before we started the e-signature process with the whole team, I went to our physician lead and said, hey, this is what we want to do. Do I have your support? Knowing full well that we're going to have to chase people around. I think the one good thing at Vault in our system is that it doesn't require a separate login. It utilizes the same sort of login that we already use for other pen systems. So it's something they're already familiar with, and they can just easily click on the link, log in with their pen ID and password, and then go through it very quickly. So I think we haven't had the same issues because it's been that easy and it's already sort of integrated into our system. So I really think it comes down to like support. You need someone who's willing to support the decision to do this because, again, you shouldn't be straddling both worlds. You shouldn't have this electronic system but also still have to chase people around. It defeats the purpose of doing it. And then with the monitors, I mean, I've worked with teams before I worked with a monitor before who worked in New York City, and she said like they weren't even allowed on site in New York. That if you wanted to come on site, you were actually put in like an office in New Jersey. That was where you monitored. So you were never going to be on site. I think it's always worth pushing back saying, well, what do you need here? Like, is there anything, what do you need on site that we can't give you? You have access to Vestigo. We can send you temp logs. Pharmacy sends temp logs. You have access to Epic. You have access, everything that you might need is electronic. Outside of a study who may have paper source documents, we can, if there's no PHI, we can just scan them to you. So I think you can always push back with monitors if you need to. But I do think they really sometimes maybe just like a trip. I don't know. I would. I would. I don't know. And then I can't remember what the last point was.
I think you got it.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Regarding the first comment, just in training, we've talked for years that we need to build a session like how to train your PI. So if anybody has any ideas on that, I think we can take that for next year. Maybe take this place.
Train them in what? Like which aspect?
Yes.
All of it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, how to be a PI. I actually, I do have some trainings on that, like how to do certain aspects of things, because it's complicated. Yeah.
Hi, so we kind of did the same thing. We started with our electronic ISF around the time of COVID. And so I know pre-COVID, it was all wet signatures for, your protocol signature pages or and your 1572s. So what we've come across is now sponsors are wanting attestation forms to allow you to get signatures through electronic platforms like your electronic ISFs. So I know it's been a learning process for us to get a non-study specific attestation form that encompasses anything that you're going to use for electronic signatures. I don't know if you've run into that issue and how you've done that. If now you could say in study startup, we're going to address this now. This is what we're doing, and how you kind of address that issue.
Yeah, that came up very quickly for us. Again, fortunately, I think because we work at a large institution, I was immediately able to go to our Office of Clinical Research, and they provided me, I don't remember what it's called. It's like a non-repudiation letter or something like that. But anyway, it's a document that's been signed basically saying like this is all all electronic signatures performed at Penn are to be used or are the same as a handwritten signature, and it's been signed by, the powers that be. I think I only had one person ask for that, but we do have documentation of that we store in with our SOP for electronic signatures. So fortunately, it hasn't been an issue for us. I can probably send you what our letter looks like if you're interested, and that way you can see, because it may exist somewhere, you may have it. But yeah, it's good that we have that in place. Yeah.
I was just going to comment about the on-site audits. I mean, sometimes that can be very efficient to have them come in, depending on how big the entire clinical research enterprise is. It's a small group, then maybe not. But us, we have a very large, robust kind of platform. It makes sense to have them on so they can talk directly to the investigators and the teams to clear up anything that they might find on the spot.
Yeah, and I think it also sometimes depends on like the complexity of the study. So if we're doing an early phase 1 study, like I was working on a study last year, it was 10 days of dosing. The amount of CRFs, and it was a paper CRF, the amount of CRFs that had to be filled out was astronomical. That monitor did a lot remotely, but I think with this also it can help ease the burden of the time they need to spend on site, because a lot of the stuff they can look at before they come or after, so they don't need to go through the regulatory binder. So when they come on site, they can focus specifically on subject data or reviewing the informed consent, making sure everything's done, inclusion, exclusion criteria. So I think it can help ease that a little bit. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So our university is just now mandating a new E-reg system university-wide. And, but they're only mandating it for new trials moving forward, and not legacy things that are currently active. And so we're struggling right now with the straddling of the two systems. Can you speak at all to that transition? Would it be easier for us, do you think, to just transition everything that's currently active? And can you speak, this is a little more complex, but can you speak to sponsored trials versus investigator-initiated differences in that process kind of thing? And like, I'm just wondering, like, where at what point in a study is it worth making that transition kind of thing? So that's where I'm like, if a study's closing in the next year, do we really want to make this transition?
No.
Do you see? Because
Don't.
But then we're straddling that
Yeah,
thing
and
for the next year.
I know,
half
and
paper, half not paper.
and it
So
seems-
we're not all in yet, and that's where we're like in this. It's a frustrating limbo to be in. As
I think yeah, for us, the good thing for us was, I think because it was during COVID, like we didn't have a lot starting up, and the studies that we had been going on for a few years. But I mean, if you think about it, if you want to go in and add those studies in, you're talking about uploading every protocol amendment, every IRB approval, every version of your ICF, every training doc, everything. And I would say, unless you have someone fully dedicated to that specific job, don't do it. I just don't think it's worth it. I do think it's worth, like, just set that date and just say, okay, everything here, this study's just going to continue to be paper, but just know that that's going to end. It's not going to last forever. But then, yeah, everything at this date, as we're starting up, is all going to go into the system. I think trying to go backwards and do it, that was a decision we made very early on, and it was like, no, we're not going to do that. The amount of work, we just didn't have the bandwidth to do that amount of work. I can't speak a lot to investigator-initiated. We don't do a lot of work with that. We sort of mainly work on the industry stuff. We do have someone else who works more on investigator-initiated stuff, and I don't think she utilizes Vault. She works on the Mayflower study for us. So for Mayflowers, she utilizes Vault because that's what we use. But I think for some of our other stuff, they don't utilize that at all. But I would say if you're gonna do it, probably worth it to do it for all of it. Yeah.
I had one more question. You said you will share documents pretty early on, even during the site qualification pieces. So are you building your study binder even before you're selected for the trial sometimes?
Sometimes, yes. Yeah, and mind you, I'm not putting in a lot of data. The one thing is, so if I want to enter a new sponsor, a new drug, I need to submit that to IT. So if it's not already in the system, I need to do a submission for that. So I'm not going to waste my time and do that. Rather, what I'll do, I'll put in the pieces I can add in, which are like the protocol name, the protocol number, and then I'll link all of the study staff to the study. So that way, if we don't move forward with it, I can just retire the study and not worry about it. So I'm not going to put the same amount of effort into it, but I am going to add all of our personnel to it, all the staff. Yeah.
So our e-regulatory platform is Complion. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but they charge per binder, I believe. So we do not open until we've been selected, gone through our internal feasibility and things like that. But just a different perspective. And our regulatory coordinators will create the binder, and then we'll start slowly. We'll still be likely in startup, like it won't be open yet, but we will start preparing that binder on the back end of things that are already applicable. We know who will be on the study and things like that for CVs and things like that. So interesting seeing different ways of doing it. So
Yeah, I haven't worked in Compliant at all. So you mentioned like having to pay per binder. Again, for us with Viva, the good thing is that from like a departmental perspective, we don't pay. I'm sure we pay somewhere. We pay somewhere. There's, they take all fees at the end of the study, at the study closeout. So somewhere we're paying for it. But so the higher level of system that we have is good because we don't have to incur those fees. So I have the ability to do things that maybe other groups wouldn't be able to do. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And one other thing, kind of a little bit different that we've done is we did kind of just notify all sponsors when we decided to go e-regulatory, and we did, unless they were closing like in the next year or so, we went ahead and did all of that. It was a lot, and there was like a more designated person.
Oh, yeah, that's good to know.
For
Yeah.
that, but it was a lot. But once most sponsors didn't push back, but the ones that did, I think we're tweaking our SOP right now to make sure everything as far as what y'all were talking about with the attestation, what we use electronically, and then just at starting now, like this is what we're going to use, best to go, comply on, all of those things. So
Yeah.
just a little different perspective, but thanks so much
Yeah.
for all this information. Great.
Yeah, sure. I had a sponsor email me yesterday and say, oh, well, can't you just email me all the documents the way you did for the other study? And I was like, no, I can't. We work solely in Vault now. And so, before we would make concessions and do that, but I'm to the point now where I'm like, no, this is the world we're operating in. I understand your frustration, but this is how we do things now. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that. But it's easy to get access to the system, and here are the steps you need to do for that. And she was totally fine. She was totally fine with it. So
It's okay to say no.
it's okay to say no. Yeah. I've gotten really good at it because I think you have to. If you give an inch, they'll take a mile. So at some point, you really need to be firm on it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Next, I'd like to invite Rachel Rich up to speak from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. She's going to talk about the appropriate use of electronic, remote, and in-person consenting, and the platform that she uses is RedCap.
So I can just click here.
Hi. Good morning. All right, I have no disclosures, but I just wanted to mention that this consenting process is with our guidance with the state of Alabama and based on our institutional guidelines. So consenting, so in-person, remote, e-consent, what are each of these and when do we use them and how do we use them? So in-person consent is what most of our RCs are accustomed to utilizing. It's a process where a healthcare provider educates a patient about the risk and benefits and alternates and gives alternatives of a given procedure or intervention. The patient must be competent to make this voluntary decision. Now, then we have remote consent, and it can be over the phone or via Zoom. This is an informed consent process where the person obtaining the consent and the person to be consented are not in the same physical location. So for example, you can have the informed consent discussion remotely and then sign the consent in person. So you can have both. And then e-consent can be in person or remotely. This is performed through the use of an electronic system, and it can be utilized in both remote and in person. For example, I can go to the clinic and consent a patient using an iPad, or a patient can also use like a QR code and scan it with their phone and sign the consent on their phone. So because we have all these options, we have updated our informed consent checklist, and this is found on CFCRnet. And the new version started on April 11th of this year. So where you can see what has changed is the method of consent, and where you can check multiple options. So you can be in-person, remote, e-consent. You just do this in the checklist, and that way you utilize it with the consent that you sent through. Along with the method being changed, we have also updated the remaining part of the consent. And here you can see subjects are repeatedly asked if they have any questions or if the consent was obtained remotely and they were given opportunity to contact the study team and have questions answered. So when you're consenting remotely, it is also important to make sure you still are reviewing that whole consent. So we're still using the same process and procedures that we're used to. We're just making sure that even if it's remotely, you are making sure you're covering each page of the consent, multiple questions asked. And I like to make sure that I'm not just asking like open-ended questions, yes or no, but I'm making sure that they're understanding the big picture of the study. And then the other portion is the prior to signing the consent, the research team or e-consent form has asked multiple questions. So we're even checking this in our new checklist. And due to COVID happening, a lot of sites have moved over to this remote consent option. So if you are using this remote consent and calling a patient or over Zoom, just make sure you're HIPAA compliant and check with your local institutions to make sure we have all our bases covered. And this document is found on the CF Clinical Research Toolbox. So for remote consenting, or when you're doing e-consenting, I like just to make sure that we're verifying the patient's identity. Because if it's over the phone, you're not seeing them, so you're not sure we're talking to the right patient. So I like to do a two-step check. And you can have a patient like even show like their driver's license over, or if you have the medical records up, you can use their address or phone number, their date of birth, and then some universities or health centers have a security question. So if you call the hospital and a patient family member wants info, there's usually a security question for you to gain access to that information. I've also used that with consenting, just as a check. So in-person consent, this is the one most of us are accustomed to, and a process we've probably done so many times. The thing I love about in-person consent is you have the ability to interpret the patient's understanding. You can get those facial cues. You can tell, oh, is their facial expression showing? Do I need to go over something more? It also allows for multiple layers of consent discussion. So I tend to contact a potential research subject. We review the consent and the timeline. I also email them the consent and set up a follow-up call, so I have that second step where I'm talking with them. We review eligibility, and then we make sure we have the right screening timeline. We ask about follow-up consent questions and plan a screening date. And then when we're together for screening, that's when we get the in-person. We're reviewing again and signing that consent with a wet signature. Remote consent. I don't know about you guys, but I am a planning RC, and so I love to like pre-plan for my weeks ahead. So at our university, we're not split between pediatric and adult side. So we're covering, both patient populations. So this is where it comes in handy for me. So our pediatric team goes through, yes, please laugh. It's Saturday morning, guys. Okay, so our pediatric team goes through the next week's visits on Tuesday mornings, and our adult team goes through patients on Wednesday afternoons. And so being able to manage both patients and populations, I appreciate having that remote consent option so that I can consent them ahead of time. And then I use this for our biorepository samples. So it allows me to consent them, also talk to the patient, and plan for that next week when they're coming into clinic. So they're already notified of the samples that I'll be collecting. It's just very efficient because then I'm not running to clinics with the consent, hopping in between providers and social works and the pharmacist, and I can just come in and be like, hey, got that sample? Okay, great, here's your signed consent, and then get our samples to our lab. It's just very helpful with organization. Now with remote consenting with our team, like I use it for basically biorepository, and I'm also on like the lung transplant. So we procure those lungs at time of transplant. And because we don't work 24/7 and patients can be called in at any time, I basically just give the thumbs up on the paging saying, yes, they've consented, we can procure those lungs. So it just helps, that remote consent option helps so much with planning. And then we have e-consent. Who's used e-consenting before? Awesome, okay. I've used e-consenting for a study that performs all telemedicine. So it's not a CF study, but the whole study is set up telemedicine. So for adolescents, it just allows me to contact the patient, sign, it goes directly into our database and keeps everything organized. And then this, even though it's an e-consent, it just means they're signing electronically. So you still can do it in person or remote. It can be captured on both. So one of the pros for e-consenting is the database that I use is REDCap, and it loads the consent directly into the database, and I can also send surveys out. So it just keeps organization that it's all under the same patient, and I can just send out and make sure they're consenting and go through it with them. The other thing I like about consenting is we use it for investigator-initiated trials that use questionnaires. And so there's multiple options for question formatting. And so you're able to capture the information you need. So for our biorepository samples, I can ask, or it's notified or labeled each one where it's blood, sputum, and different like nasal cells, and they go through and we can add different things that we're collecting at each time. And the other part I like is we all have those patients that are like, I'm not tech savvy, I can't do this, I don't have that email. Well, you're still able to e-consent with them because you can take either a tablet or have them use their phone and sit right next to them and go through the consent with them. At our institution, it's not yet used for industry studies. Like I said, we use it basically for biorepository or investigator-initiated. And just, I can't say this enough, but check with your local institution and your guidelines and make sure we're covered. Our institution uses REDCap, and we have that extra e-consenting addition so that we're able to do that. So I have, obviously, created a demonstration for the e-consenting, and if you choose to fill it out and submit it, great. It does come back to me, but none of the information used will be, captured for anything beyond this. So if you wanted to get your phones out and scan the QR code, it just shows like the different options that you guys have or that we have for developing a survey. And I'm opening. So you'll just see multiple questions where it's got some, multiple choice, yes or no. And then at the end, there is that 3-step process for signing. So you have to type in your name, electrically signature, and then date it for today for the survey to be approved. and it's just for fun. All right. Any questions?
Good. Oh, oh.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go to the mic?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Mike, please.
So at the beginning, there was a slide, and I think it said send safe on it. Send safe. Is that what the mechanism you use for like sending the documents? So yeah, right up there, WebEx, RedCap, or send safe.
I use RedCap.
Okay, those are just different options.
Yes. Other people have used Adobe Sign. I know one of our coordinators uses that. But mostly all of mine are used through RedCap.
And then you mentioned you ask questions for understanding. Do you come up with those questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's in our guideline document, so like we're checking and going through each page. But yes, for certain studies, I do make sure I'm going through and asking questions back to them.
Got it. And then the last one is, does your IRB have specific guidance on when you can use either of these, or is it really just up to you and depending on the type of study?
Heather? Got my regulatory boss here.
Hey, I'm Heather. I work at UAB with Rachel. So our IRB does have specific guidance on when we can and can't use this. So, for example, she mentioned we have not used any e-consenting for industry-sponsored studies. And the reason for that is because at UAB, we have to justify when using e-consent or remote consent, why it is not reasonable to do it in person. So for these repository studies that we have or these lung transplants, we send this information to the IRB and explain this isn't reasonable because these patients are having bronchs at 5 o'clock in the morning and our staff can't be there that early, or the way these transplants occur, it's not reasonable for us to consent them in person at the time of the visit. But for most industry-sponsored studies that we have, I can't justify that because at the screening visit, right, I can reasonably consent them in person. So the only exception to that would be if there was some type of washout that was required, but then we probably could justify it, but we haven't had that situation yet. So we're allowed to use remote consenting or e-consenting in any situation where it is not reasonable to get written consent in person. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Does your board give you like guidance about what that is?
They don't really give guidance. That's right. We have to present the situation and then they say, why is this not reasonable? And we submit to them why it's not reasonable. And they say, that's fair, that's not fair. So there's nothing in writing other than that process.
Do you think that will shift over time?
Possibly, because I do remember a time, I've been at UAB almost 25 years. I remember a time when we were never allowed to use Adobe or RedCap, right? COVID changed all that. So perhaps it could change, but right now that's where they've drawn the line.
Yeah, I'll say so. So it's some of the FDA guidance on e-consenting. So there's some risks associated with it, obviously. Like and that's why some of that stuff was implemented in the checklist to kind of ensure that you're maintaining compliance. You're not able to be there in person and see their face and identify. So you need to have some way to verify their identity. And so I think that's part of why our IRB, they don't want just you using it just to use it. And so if you have some reason to justify, there's some study procedures that are going to be done before the first visit. So we want them to, like, I had a study investigator say that they wanted them to start filling out a diet record the week before they come in for their first visit. It's difficult to bring them in just for consenting, just for them to do a diet record. Or an industry-sponsored study would allow us to potentially use or e-consenting, if we had a guidance document that, explained our process, it was compliant, and then theirs specifically had a washout period before the first visit, and that we were able to skip that initial visit if we could consent them prior to.
That makes sense.
One more.
Do you think as we move more towards telehealth, and opportunities for like, I think of instances where you have telehealth visits like later on and only phone visits later on, even in industry studies and things like that, where you don't have opportunities to reconsent people because they're not in person any longer. And that, I could see that opening up opportunities and things like that in situations like that where you don't have, you can say, oh, well, this opens up, having an e-consent opens up the opportunity for us to consent somebody when they're no longer coming to our institution, or even just things like in clinic, people just do telehealth visits occasionally and things like that. So I was even thinking about like, man, that would be amazing if we could even do our registry.
Yes.
Via e-consent, and that process, because we lose registry consent. I mean, it happens all the time just because you're consenting in so many different places and so many different physicians and other staff have their hands on those, at least at our institution. And so they get lost, and we end up having to reconsent patients on the registry, especially a lot, because just simply because things get lost or you didn't circle the AM PM or all these things that is like, if you move to e-consent, you could monitor that a lot easier than you can when it's in person and having to go back and wait for that person to come back in and things like that. So I think it would be interesting to see if we could make a case for instances like that, to still be able to use e-consent. I'm curious. I kind of want to try it and see. I'm curious if anybody else is able to make a case for that kind of scenario. I think it would be.
I think UAB would allow us to do e-consent for the registry.
Yeah. And it's very minimal risk and things like that too, so I feel like there's definitely a case to be made for that.
But we don't manage that process, the clinic team manages the registry, so I guess they just have their system. But I think our IRB, I think, would say, okay, you justify that, we would allow that.
I know, I feel like I'm gonna try it.
Our institution is switching over to Epic, and one of the things we're looking at is to integrate getting e-consent for registry through our EHR.
Right.
One more.
I'm at the University of Michigan, and we actually do e-consent for the registry. Part of it was for during COVID, and we established that since so many people were virtual. And it's actually become really convenient, especially with our adults, because they don't come in 4 times a year in most cases. And then, sometimes if you've got some other situation where a grandparent brings the kid to a visit. And so we implemented it so that we could get everybody in the year that they joined us. And it wasn't a problem at all with our IRB.
Good.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite Tiffany McCrabb up from the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. She's recently integrated the medical record of Epic in with her clinical trial management system, Encore. Yeah. Excellent. Was that?
Okay. Good morning. I'm a little intimidated to follow 2 people who've been doing this technology in their center for a while. both our CTMS and our EHR are very new for us. So just be prepared that I may not be able to answer all your questions. There's probably quite a few of you out there that have been doing this a lot longer than me. So I think what they really wanted was proof that you can do it, and a few months later still stand up and walk around and survive. So it has been a rough couple of years at our site with all these changes, but you can do it. So if you haven't done it yet, I think I'm just here as proof that you can do it. I'm hoping that I can advance things. Is that what I want? Okay. I don't have any disclosures related to this presentation. So our campus has had many changes over the years. Our hospitals were previously owned by an out-of-state for-profit organization, with most of our outpatient clinical services falling under the umbrella of the university's College of Medicine. A recent merger of the clinical enterprise of the OU Health Sciences Center with the now Oklahoma-owned nonprofit hospital system has formed a fully integrated academic healthcare system that has been rebranded as OU Health. Over the years, our CF Center has moved several times. I've been at our CF Center for 18 years. But this is where our CF Center has called home since this building was constructed in 2007. So we are located in the Oklahoma Children's Hospital, which has also been renamed multiple times in my career. So we previously had separate inpatient and outpatient medical records. Our inpatient medical record was Meditech, which was terrible. Our outpatient medical record changed names multiple times. I can't even really tell you what it was. I think most recently it was Athena Health, but it was called something else before that, Centricity or something. So it was really difficult. One, for the interface that happened between inpatient and outpatient wasn't great. They always said that they would not talk to each other, but that you could get things, but you really couldn't. You're logging into multiple systems. So tracking down information about subjects was always challenging. And that really resulted in some disjointed care. One of the first orders of business with the new merger to OU Health was to streamline the electronic health record across the enterprise. So with OU Health encompassing the clinical aspect of our system, the university is now able to shift focus primarily to academic and research endeavors. Tricky, though, is that all the clinical team are all OU Health employees, and those of us who are involved in research remained university employees. So we don't have the same days off, which is a little tricky. If one of your patients is coming, the university's technically closed, so it's your day off, but you're going to see them because the clinics are open. So it still provides a little bit of disjointedness, but we work with what we've got, right, guys? Yeah. It's definitely better than 3 systems in the past. We're happier with just 2. On the university side, with their really trying to focus on academics and research, they decided to implement the clinical trial management system that the oncology researchers had been using for years, and to mandate that across the research across the whole university. So the plan was that we would go live with both. Luckily, it didn't happen at the exact same time, but that's the story that I'm going to tell you about today. So what started first was actually planning for our electronic health record, which we started that planning in February of 2021. Then we volunteered to be one of the first non-oncology pilot project teams to train and move to the new CTMS. We did go live with the CTMS first because there were some setbacks in the implementation of our new EHR. There were some issues with infrastructure across the university, being able to support the new EHR, so that's what set that back a little bit. So we went live with our CTMS in May of 22, and a year later we went live with our electronic health record in June of 23. So that was just a few months ago, okay? We haven't slept a lot since then, So bear with us, okay? If you're familiar with the novice to expert model, I'm going to confess to you now that this is where we are, right here, okay? So, there's a lot to be said about time working with things, and you may be like, oh, why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they doing that yet? Because we're here in the novice phase, that's why, okay? I'm just prepared for all these IT experts out there to start asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't know. Let me ask my IT team. So first I'm going to talk about our clinical trial management system, which many of you have probably been live on for years, and you're like, why are you guys so far behind in Oklahoma? Because that's how we work. We're behind. So what is a clinical trial management system? It depends on who you ask, but the people that sell clinical trial management systems say that they're a web-based system to manage and track clinical research activities within an institution. They're centralized, comprehensive systems for managing the full cycle of a clinical trial. It acts as a hub for research operations, improving visibility of an institutional's research profile. Doesn't that sound pretty? It's a place where you have to put a whole bunch of information. That's where it is. Yep. So what can you do with the CTMS? The functionality includes protocol management, subject administration, biospecimen management, and most importantly for our institution, financial management, customized reporting. So they say CTMS helps to improve protection of subjects, helps to facilitate remote monitoring, which is true for us, improve compliance, streamlined research data management, accurate institutional metrics, very important to our institution, access logs and audit trails, and the reports that are available this way certainly are helpful, efficient program and resource management, and most importantly, a centralized research portfolio. So I think previously our university didn't have any way of really tracking who's doing what. Within each individual little department, we knew what we were doing, but everybody didn't know what everybody else was doing, and now they do. So you can manage study startup, track amendments, track regulatory approvals, provide access to study documents, track subject activities, and the primary thing that it's being used for us is managing study financials and billing compliance. So you can do sponsor invoicing through the system, you can track subject visits, you can build study grids, billing study grids to support the research billing review process, which thus far, in the 3-4 months that we've been live, it's not going great, but we are doing it. We're learning it. The research billing reviewers are learning. I mean, it has been a work in progress for sure. There's been a lot of emails back and forth saying, are we billing this to the study or are we billing this to the insurance? What are we doing? So it is certainly designed to capture that, but we're all just still learning. Everybody's still learning. So that CTMS project involved a lot of e-learnings first, and then we spent 12 to 14 hours each with individualized training with the CTMS trainer at our institution. It was a very heavy workload up front to enter all of our protocols into CTMS. They required that we upload anything that has a billable component, so anything that involved any of our hospital systems, lab, x-ray, anything like that that had any kind of billable component had to be loaded, which was pretty much everything for us. We had to create a spreadsheet of all of our research participants for migration into CTMS. Now, if we had had a REDCap study, they would have taken that. We didn't have anything in REDCap at the time that was like investigator initiated, but they utilized our rudimentary spreadsheet that we have for registry, for tracking registry consents and that kind of thing. They kind of insulted our Excel spreadsheet, to be honest with you. Those IT people didn't like the way we were tracking it. They made fun of it, but they did utilize it to upload all of our registry into the system. Since registry doesn't really have a billing component, it wouldn't have been required, but we wanted the benefits that go along with the integration for our registry patients so that we could get alerts when our patients come to the emergency room and that kind of thing to capture. So we did put all of those about 300 patients into our system. So that was kind of a lot of work up front. And we were having weekly readiness meetings leading up to our go live with the CTMS. here's what we kind of were expected. We just really had a lot of high hopes, didn't we, girls? We were just like, oh, this is going to be great. We're going to love it. We thought, all these systems are going to be just talking to each other. It's going to be really smooth. Everything's going to flow back and forth. And we're just going to love it. It's going to make our lives so much easier. But the reality is, early on, there was a lot of duplication of work. It involved a lot of us putting our protocols into a system that wasn't providing us any immediate benefit to us on our daily work. So that was a little frustrating. Then we discovered that data from the CTMS would have to be pushed, into the EHR once our EHR was up and live. So that was a piece. That's just an IT piece that we don't know. I mean, I'm a nurse. We started out documenting on paper when I was in nursing school and as a new nurse, so I don't know these IT things. We had to learn a lot of new technology. Our IT analysts used a lot of words that we didn't know those. What does that mean? Tell me what you mean by segment. When we're making things like study calendars and that kind of thing, we're like, what's a segment? And how do we break that down? We would say, you know what, we already have a study calendar. It's provided to us by the sponsor. Isn't it beautiful? We have it hanging up right here on the cabinet. Why do we have to put it into this other system? We liked it the way it was, right? And we certainly found that the CTMS wasn't all that useful to us before we became integrated with our new EHR. That's just honest truth from our team. Probably just because we're backwoods Oklahoma folks who just don't like technology sometimes. Okay, so here's just a little example of what it looks like entering protocols in there. Across the top, let's see if I can make this. Across the top, each one of these tabs has a whole big section like this for you to put information in. Under each one of those, where you associate the staff members, put all your sponsor information in there, links to your NCT number, all of that stuff. So each one of these tabs has information to be entered, and then each one of these sections down here has information too. So I don't know if we ever timed how long it took to put a protocol in, but a good part of a day, usually. So for subject administration, now that we're integrated, when we go to add a subject to the CTMS, we use this little section here because this is linked to our EHR. So we start looking up a patient here and it finds them in our EHR. We confirm that that is our patient and we go from there. Before we were integrated with the EHR, we were creating patients here. And then once the EHR went live, they had to go and make connections and make sure that they had all the patients correct, which also was a little bit of a headache. So that's that. In that same subject area, then when you select on your subject, then you can go in down here on the left-hand side to enter. Those demographics flow over from the EHR once you're integrated. So that part shows up automatically, but then you go in here to enter the consent. And if you've built the protocol correctly and you've uploaded the consents correctly and put all the numbers there correctly, when you go in to enter the consent for that patient, it's going to pop up for you the most recent consent, which is the one that they should be signing. It has a section there where you're capturing eligibility, indicating whether where they are in the protocol as far as whether they're on treatment, and follow up. You can also track SAEs here as well. And here's the lovely calendar, which is the bane of our existence. But that's a little bit about the subject. So that you can have a specific calendar specific to that patient. For reporting, there's a lot of reports available. If you wanted to run a report of a particular investigator, all of their studies, you can do that really nicely. We didn't go back and enter old protocols. It's on my to-do list because I think we would really like to at least have, a protocol name and number, just so that we have that for being able to print a nice, pretty report in the future. But there's lots of availability with reporting. I'll be honest, we did the training for reporting. We haven't utilized it a whole lot as of yet. For financials and invoicing, none of us are accountants either. We're research coordinators. We're not that good with accounting. But those options are there as well. You can do invoicing through this system. Okay, enough about our CTMS, which is Encore, by the way, if you're just dying to know. The electronic health record, like I mentioned before, is really helpful to us to have just one electronic health record, but it has been a lot to learn. Our previous ones were not very sophisticated, and everything that we thought was going to flow over didn't flow over, so we're still looking in the old record for some things that we need and printing those and scanning them in, and we're still in a bit of flux as far as that goes. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about our electronic health record process, if I can get it to move. So we participated in the clinical systems design part for our electronic health record because as registry coordinators, we wanted to give input as to where things were being captured and things that needed to be captured in our clinical encounters to make it easy for us to find. So we did participate in those, making some specialty-specific decisions about content. They listened carefully. There was a lot of promises made. They weren't all delivered on at the time that we went live, but we did talk a lot about what we wanted our EHR to look like. We had a lot of meetings, both on the clinical side and on the research side. We started working on it in February of 2021. It was paused because our go live date was changed multiple times, and then it was resumed again. So we had monthly clinical system design meetings. We had bi-weekly EHR research work group meetings. We had lots of learning videos and user web to practice. We had e-learnings of about 4 to 8 hours total, depending upon the role on the team. We had in-person training classes for 4 to 16 hours, depending upon the role that you play on the team. And then we had a playground where we could practice before we went live. Like I mentioned, we went live in June, not that long ago. So if your role is primarily just a research coordinator, this is what the research coordinator dashboard looks like in the EHR. So you can run reports. I'm going to drive around a little bit. I don't know how easy it is for you guys to see. Pretty good. You can run reports. This is all, oh, by the way, these are screenshots from the training environment. All of the providers, coordinators, patients are fake, and they have cute names, some of them. So you can run reports for all of your patients and update those reports. You can have a list of all your studies that you can quickly click into and look at information there. You can make task lists. We haven't utilized that yet, but I hear that they're helpful. Things like IRB expiration dates and that kind of stuff can show up here as well. In Basket is everybody's favorite thing because it's usually full of all kinds of stuff. And things that we really like, this ADT event notifications, we do really enjoy that. And then our research analyst team, they put some links that we requested to have links to in the system. So from that dashboard, if your primary role is just as a research coordinator, this is the view that you see. And we discovered that if you only have one role in our EHR, it's much easier. when you're a nurse and you're an investigator and you wear multiple hats in the clinic, then you have to kind of go between different views of things. So that part I discovered was a little bit more challenging. So things that we really enjoy from that in Basket is these ADT, which stands for Admission, Discharge, Transfer. So we do get notifications anytime a patient that is associated with our study is admitted, discharged, or transferred. This particular research coordinator has some very naughty patients, apparently, who go to the ER all the time. So in each one of those, then you just click on it to open up and get the note from, as long as it was within our system. So let me clarify that. We're not getting notifications when it's in another system, but with the Care Everywhere, we can access that information if they told us that they went to another ER. So how does it look to somebody who's not involved in research? So like our other clinicians that are in clinic that just, how would they know somebody's in a study? So in that little bar on the left, this nice little gold research participants notification is there saying that this patient is a research participant. If they were to click on that, then it will open up the study that they're involved in. It includes the study title, the PI, the contact, which is usually the lead coordinator for the study, and a little description of the study. So that's available to anybody in our electronic health record can see that. So the information that's included there is only the information that's publicly available about a study. Did we move? There we go. So this little research symbol, the little boxes stacked together, I don't know how easy it is to see from out there, but this little research symbol also shows up when we've associated a particular procedure, lab, visit with a study. If you see that little symbol there to the side, that lets, for example, that lets our PI know that that is a research associated lab, a lab that they need to go in and assess clinical significance for. And that there's a whole process for doing that as well. So we like that little symbol. Okay, so our biggest challenges, I don't want to be all negative about it, but I'm going to start with the negative things. It was a pretty extensive training time on top of a really busy clinical research workload. And we've been short clinic coordinators too, so a lot of times I fill in that role as well. So that was really challenging. I would say the number of meetings that we attended through this process was ridiculous. So many meetings. And then once we went live, there's always unexpected scenarios that weren't covered in training and nobody knows how to do. You don't really know what you don't know until you need to know it, and you need to know it right now because somebody's starving, they're fasting, we need to order we need to get their lab done, we need to get them enrolled, all the things, and it needs to happen quickly. And when you're a novice at it, you're like getting out your little tip sheets and you're flipping through them and you're this and you're grabbing anybody else that has done it before and let's look at it, and then nobody's screen looks the same. I'm a nurse practitioner, so I have a provider screen, but I also have a research screen. So sometimes I'm not allowed to collect, as a nurse practitioner, I guess, I'm not allowed to collect specimens, as if I'm not also a nurse who can collect specimens. It's just not set up that way. I don't have the box to click to collect a specimen. It's the strangest thing, so I have to, anyhow, all that to say, we are working through some of those things. But you go to help somebody and you're like, oh, your screen doesn't look like my screen. My screen looks different than that. So that part has been a little challenging. And just learning multiple systems at the same time made us all feel really inadequate at times. And then being asked to speak at a national conference about it months later made me feel really self-conscious about what I don't know. Okay, so what we love about the integration, I already mentioned the admission, discharge, transfer notifications to our in-baskets. We discovered really early on the PI doesn't need to know that. The PI's in-basket is already overflowing with other things. So we turned that off for the PI. Just the coordinators get those notifications because it was a little too much. We do like the BPA, which is best practice advisory. It's really intended for clinical care, for saying, this patient's blood pressure is elevated. Here's the guidelines on blood pressure. But it can be used for research too, to pop up for things like a contraindicated med, like somebody shows up to the ER and they're about to prescribe them something that is not allowed on your study. It'll pop up and say, this is a contraindicated med for a patient in this trial. Call this person. So that's an option as well. And study eligibility is another thing that BPAs can do. If you have specific diagnoses and that kind of thing, it could pop up somebody's, in dermatology clinic, and it could pop up and say, it looks like this patient is eligible for this trial going on at this center. Here's the research coordinator, so that's another option. We like the smart forms for common encounter types. I'm going to be honest, we haven't made all of our source documents into electronic source documents through the system. It would be way too much of a build on top of just barely moving over. But something like a follow-up phone call that happens a lot, especially like in Vertex trials, those follow-up phone calls, we made a standard for that, so that can be loaded and done pretty easily. Smart sets for protocol specific orders. So if you have a list of orders for a certain study, you can search it up that way, and that list of orders will pop up for you, so you're not having to go in and search. We really love the easy monitor access. Previously, we really didn't. I mean, it was borderline impossible to get our monitors access to our electronic health records. So much easier now that they can have access this way. And it's much easier to access outside records at other institutions that use the same EHR. All of the other big institutions in Oklahoma City utilize this particular EHR, so it's nice that we can access records that way. Not always perfect, but a lot of the time we can access records. Okay, so what's still to come? Our system, we have the option to use e-regulatory as well, which is to come, but we're still kind of drowning a little bit, so we probably won't do that right away. But it is an option for us at our institution as well. It is the Advara product that we have access to. Integration with our local IRB is coming, and central IRBs like Advara is coming. We have a meeting coming up just next week on integration with some EDCs, including metadata. We're having a meeting about that. And then eventually we would love to have integration with Portia. So that would be that's just a pipe dream, just a pipe dream. So this is our team. I will tell you that I've probably been a little overly dramatic about how hard it's been, but our clinic manager made us little like go live support kits that had a lot of like chocolate and caffeine in them. Because those first couple of weeks were really rough. I mean, for the clinical teams and for us researchers. But we have a really great team. This is us at Great Strides. I'm just going to brag on my team. This is us at the Great Strides walk. We always have t-shirts, usually designed by one of our patients for our team to walk. This is our research team, our PI, Dr. Mehdi, Kim and Ashley, research coordinators right there, and I'm the research manager and sub-investigator. And this is our whole team, probably at a holiday party or something. I don't know. We like to have a good time. So it's just a regular Tuesday. We just dress any old way. We love working at a children's hospital and getting to be fun and have a good time while we're inside completely stressed out about our new EHR. So these are the references where I got most of that information because it certainly didn't come from my brain. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Well, not any questions. I'm happy to tell you my experience. That's what I'm happy to tell you about. Because I probably don't know. If you're an IT person, I probably don't know the answer.
Hi, I'm Diane from Hershey. I'm a nurse as well. I appreciated your humor. Sometimes we use that as a coping mechanism for
definitely.
our frustrations.
100%. Absolutely. And nervousness. It helps.
Yeah.
It keeps me from vomiting up here. It's fun.
I just wanted to tell you that in the future, you're going to toggle between novice and beginner. And even when you feel competent, you might drop back and forth. It will be frustrating because when you think that you have a grasp of the system, you'll log in and they had an upgrade. And so everything looks different.
Our upgrade comes like in 2 weeks.
You'll
So we're
call-
excited about that.
You'll call IT and you're number 7 in queue. And by the time they call you back, you're on a Zoom call. So it'll take a couple days. And then your password will expire and you have to scramble to find another password to use. But this one you can't use symbols, where everything else you use a symbol and not a number. But I just want to give you some positive vibes that it will get better and just keep smiling. And we will get through it. And 10 years later, we'll look back and we will be proficient.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Tiffany, I'm going to echo that, but I'm also going to point out to your slide of the rollout of the timeline.
Uh-huh.
Do you realize you rolled out your system in 8 months within the time frame of the EHR rollout? So you did your project and got it rolled out in advance of the EHR project, which is a good thing because that means you're ahead of them and you can tell them, this is how
There
we
you
work.
go.
And that's a
Exactly.
key lesson. So don't sell yourself short.
There may have been deadlines involved. We
Everybody-
had to do it. They forced us. They said those bills, those like orders that you used to just send with your research patient on paper down to X-ray with your study number on it. Yeah, we're not going to take those anymore. So you're going to have to do it. You have to do it. That's what they said.
We all have various degrees of imposter phenomenon, and I think it's good. It's good to have that skepticism, because that's part of being competent, is saying I got a healthy skepticism and I don't about your own abilities.
For
'Cause
sure.
that's how you learn. So you're commended to everybody. I mean, I think so.
If you ever feel like we couldn't possibly do this at our site, I mean, if Tiffany from Oklahoma can do it, you can do it. You'll hate it at the time, but eventually you'll get there. Anybody else?
So a couple things. That was great. Love the screenshots. Really good. In terms of the BPAs, when you're thinking about an investigational product, is that something that needs to be built in separately into the EHR in order for those because I know a lot of our studies will say, oh, they can't go on CYP3As or something like that. Are those things that will pop up or not?
So I'm going to confess, we are not using it for that purpose as of yet. Primarily because it was a whole class of drugs. Like, how am I going to list? And really, our IT analyst is like, I'm not a nurse or an investigator. I don't know. You can't just give me a class of drugs and have it pop up. So we haven't gone there yet, because I would have to pull specific drugs that would pop up. So if it's something like, I mean, I can't even think of a good example for a study that we have going on right now, which is part of why we haven't done it yet. But if it was like this one particular drug is not allowed, this one drug is not allowed, or these 5 drugs is not allowed, or even if it was 15, we can submit that. Our IT analysts can build that way. But when it's, like you said, this entire class of drugs, that's a lot harder to do.
Got it. And then for the billing piece, we don't have a CTMS integrated with billing, so I'm curious how it works. So when you go into your EMR, do you have to, we have to run a report and either link the charges to the insurance or to the study? And from there, those charges linked to the study will flow into CTMS. Is that how it works for you?
That's how it's supposed to work, but then there's somebody else that will then send us that invoice, because we're university, OU Health will send us a bill. We get a bill as the Department of Pediatric Pulmonology. We get a bill from OU Health for all of our patients that were participating in that study that had a chest x-ray.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
It does.
But then we could also utilize CTMS to create, receipts for patients. We can utilize it to invoice sponsors and that kind of thing too. Yeah.
And then just one final comment, because I think about this all the time, how great it would be to have a working group, because a lot of us use Epic. There are so many tools for smart phrases and all of this stuff. I would love to get a group together where we can utilize all the technology to be able to really build good source in Epic. I just think that would be something really good. I don't have the IT experience to build a lot of this stuff. And I know I've worked at institutions before where IT people would actually build out your visit for you. We don't do that at Penn, but I think that would be something that would be so helpful that we could then work for different, you can tweak it for different studies then, depending on what the needs are. So.
And they've offered to do that, but not right away since we just went live. They said eventually less complicated things they could build out. If we just provided them source, they could build it for us. They say they can. So there's that. I don't know if you've utilized WeLearning. Anybody utilize WeLearning community? Anybody familiar with that? I mean, my understanding is that that's kind of what it is like a community of people that utilize it, that maybe that might be a place where we could have a group of folks that I think.
The only caveat we don't use Epic. So I don't exclude people who might not be on Epic, might be on proprietary systems from that. And the reason for doing that is the federal government's going to have a role in determining that. And Epic has been accused of data blocking. So they you got to have a healthy skepticism, which I think everybody, except if there are any Epic people, would have about what they can deliver. So if you're going to have a working group, keep it on an open platform, if you will, that mindset. I mean, that's just a request. It's not.
If it's a working group focused on how can we make Epic work better for us, though, that part is tricky. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
All right, well,
Great.
thank you.
Thanks so much.
I think that is it for today, but this is, I think, maybe the fourth iteration of this session we've done over the last several years, kind of in technology and research. And I just wanted to highlight, what might be some topics that we think about in the next 5 years or so. And just to the point here, I am not a subject matter on any of these things, but one of the things that I think, as I was reading from an Edvara white paper, that we're likely to see built into EHR very soon is artificial intelligence to be able to screen patients, provide review inclusion exclusion from a full protocol, directly send a report to the coordinators and teams, using artificial intelligence to write your consent. I think that's something that would be very, very interesting if you provide the program your draft and a sponsor draft, or even a history of what you've done before. It would write your consent for you using like a chat, chat AI kind of thing. It would write your consent, send it to you for review in minutes. So that's something that would be just, I think, incredibly time saving, and it also just feels like losing a little bit of control. But the other thing that I think we'll definitely see is a lot of system integration, which is what we've talked about a lot here today, but single sign-on for where your EHR is now your source and it's now your EDC. It's just one single point. We're not using separate systems. It's one single thing. That'll be, again, incredible time save, I think, for a lot of our coordinator teams. And then the third piece that I will likely see is just more biometric sensors, integrated sensors, things like CGMs that we're already seeing a lot of. If anybody's familiar with a device called the Tasso, it's like basically, again, I'm not the expert, but basically it's a CGM style thing that you basically wear, and you can pull samples directly off of it for your PKs. It can automatically do it for you. So you just literally are, putting your tube here and pulling it off, kind of thing. And it's also, I think it's one of those ones that they say it's mostly pain-free, whatever that exactly means. But I think what we'll absolutely see is system integration, use of biometrics, and hopefully decreasing some of the redundancy and system redundancies that we see across studies and across sponsors. Thank you guys for getting here on a Saturday morning at 7:15. And if this is your last research coordinator session or one of your last sessions, we'll look forward to seeing everybody next year. And welcome back to Boston. Thanks, everybody.